Hi, it's Kay. When you're starting to knit or crochet, there are several things I recommend you use. First is the yarn. So something like a double knitting yarn in a pale colour, not a fluffy yarn, not a dark yarn, is going to make it easier. If you choose a chunky yarn, you might find that it's a bit difficult to manage as the yarn is quite thick and you would need larger size crochet hook or knitting needles. If the yarn is thin, like a 4-ply yarn, you might become disheartened as it takes a long time to show any progress. So, if you're choosing double knitting, then you need to choose an appropriate size of knitting needle. So something like a 3 3/4 or 4mm, or in the old money, a size 9 or a size 8 would be ideal, and similarly for a crochet hook, as this size goes very well with a double knitting weight. In addition, you might like to have to hand a stitch gauge. So this enables you to measure the tension, that is how many rows and how many stitches per inch, and also it enables you to check what size of needle or hook you've got. So it gives the Imperial, the metric, and the American system. So with a knitting needle, if the needle rattles around in the hole, then obviously that's not the right size. And if you can't get the needle into the hole, that's not the right size. But if it goes in with a little room to spare, in the sense that it can go right in to the hole in the gauge, then you know you've got the right size. That helps you, particularly if you are then going to use needles that don't have a size marked on them. Similarly, with a crochet hook, you will find that most will have a mark on the shank, but not the hook. The smooth end you can put into the gauge to check the size that you have. So that shows you the size of the hook you're working with, so that you are working with a hook or knitting needles that give you a nice soft fabric when you're knitting with double knitting yarn. If you choose a hook or needles that are too small, the fabric that you make will end up being tight and firm. If you use a hook or knitting needles that are too large, you will find that it doesn't hold its shape well and it becomes easy to catch on fingernails or other items, and it won't satisfy you that it's a nice smooth fabric. Other things that you're likely to need are a wool sewing up needle. So this one, for example, it's got a nice broad eye that you can get the yarn into and a blunt end. The reason why it's a good idea to have a blunt end is that it doesn't split the stitches. So when you're sewing in the ends at the beginning or the end, or when you've had to join the yarn, it won't break the stitches. It will enable you to slide the extra yarn in between the existing stitches without damaging the fabric. And another thing you'll need is a nice pair of scissors, because you can break the yarn, but if you break the yarn, what's likely to happen is that it will become thin, it won't break evenly. But if you have a nice pair of scissors, you can have a nice smooth end when you cut the yarn after you've finished your work. So these are the ideal tools for you to start a knitting or crochet project. Obviously, as you gain more experience, you might want to branch out and use a fluffy yarn, or you might want to use a dark yarn to do your work, and that's fine. But when you're learning, you want to be able to see the stitches clearly and you want them to be easy to undo if you make a mistake. And a fluffy yarn is not easy to undo, and it's more difficult to see, to count the stitches, or to spot an error if you're using a dark coloured yarn. So a light, smooth yarn to practice. Acrylic is perfect, it's inexpensive, has a wide range of colours, doesn't tangle like a fluffy yarn would do, and it's washable. So gather around you these items and you're ready to start your knitting and crochet journey.